Which Side Podcast is a proud member of the Which Side Media Collective.
This week's episode is brought to us by our Amazon affiliate link. It's super simple how it works. All you do is head over to whichsidepodcast.com, click through our Amazon link, or you can click through the link in the show notes. And everything you buy on Amazon, we get a kickback for. It's like, taking money away from Amazon and giving a little bit to us. I mean, the whole purpose of Amazon doing this is that they're trying to get you to spend more money there. We're supposed to be like, hey, go buy shit from Amazon, but don't buy shit unless you're already planning on it. But let's just face it, you are already planning on it, because we all are. So don't spend more than you're already planning. Just what you were already planning, take a little bit from Amazon and kick it our way by using our link.
But if you are looking for something to buy to support the show,
because go capitalism.
I totally recommend the game The Resistance. It's another game I got for my birthday.
It's seriously has taken over my top 5 favorite games.
It's like security culture.
It actually is. It is totally security culture.
What's really funny is that we played this at the North American Anarchist Black Cross Conference, but we played it like giant size scale without the board game.
Yeah.
And it was a blast.
I can't recommend this game enough for people.
So, yeah, check that out.
We'll have a link in the notes.
We get a little, they get a little less.
This is episode 147.
Yeah, we have Tommy Knowles on from Wildlife Defense League.
I gotta say, I love their logo.
It's pretty good.
It's a good logo. No, I love the work that they're doing, though. They're basically hunt sabbing and stopping trophy hunting and overhunting in British Columbia. I love this conversation. We talk about his time with the Sea Shepherds and all the work that they're doing and their Indiegogo campaign. So stay tuned for that. Well, what news and events do we have going on this week, Jordan?
Well, if you're in Salt Lake City this Thursday, you could go to Salt Lake City Stands with Trans Women of Color. That's at 6 p.m. at the Wallace Bennett Federal Building. You should also donate to Wildlife Defense League before their Indiegogo campaign expires. They really need your help. We talk about it in the show.
This week's listener shout-out is brought to you by Reese Biddle. They just wanted to shout out 2 YouTube channels, Bite Size Vegan and The Vegan Atheist. They say that The Vegan Atheist is actually what brought them to veganism, and they wouldn't have considered it without them. So we'll have a link to both those on the show notes, so go check both those out.
If you have something that you'd like to shout out, and you'd like to help the show at the same time, you can go to whichsidepodcast.com, click on the donate tab, donate at least $10, and we will shout out whatever we want. We'll be your shill. I'm going to slingshot this over to Jeremy now.
That cracks me up every time. September 2nd, 1987. Hundreds of people went into the ROTC headquarters in UC Berkeley and trashed the fuck out of it.
That's awesome.
It is an awesome one. There's a lot of unawesome ones this week, so yeah. I tried to find a good one because sometimes these are kind of bummers. But this was a good one out there. I pulled these little tidbits of history out of the Slingshot Personal Organizer. You should totally get one. They're awesome. You can get one at a local info shop or an online info shop like AK Press.
I really hope you enjoyed this episode.
Which side are you on? Which side are you on? Which side are you on? Which side? Which side are you on? 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 Which side are you on?
So, how's your day going?
Yeah, good. I actually just woke up. I'm not gonna lie.
No worries, me too.
Yeah, had a bit of a lazy day, so it's good.
That's really good, then, right?
Yeah, no, definitely. I always feel guilty. Like, I don't know why, but I always just feel guilty sleeping in late, and then I realize that I shouldn't feel guilty. But feel like it's a confession telling you that.
I'm so over feeling guilty. I wake up at 5:36 the rest of the week. So on weekends, if I sleep in, fuck it, whatever.
Totally, that's the same with me. Like I'm up at 7 working, and then I work at a cafe at 12:30. So I feel like, yeah, I should be allowed to do it. I guess I'm still trying to justify it.
I'm lucky to even get a weekend. So anytime I get, I'll take it.
Right on.
Yeah, I don't really think I've ever had a day, like a real day off in a long time. Even vacations, half the time I'm with this fucker and we end up doing other activist work stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, no, fair enough. I've been away. I volunteered with Sea Shepherd for 3 years, so I never had time to go away other than that, because I was always going to the ship and then coming home and like working 7 days a week to afford to go back to the ship again.
Yeah.
And came back here and started doing all wildlife defense league stuff. And I realized that I actually hadn't gone on like a legitimate, like a vacation where you go away to just like go away to like enjoy being in the place you are completely. And so I went surfing in Tofino, which is on Vancouver Island, for the first time. And that was like my first vacation in 3 years. And I was like, wow, like what have I been doing? Like, how have I not gone on like even like a little trip, you know?
Well, good. Yeah. It's funny, but you talk to activists all the time, and it's one of the things that they forget. Like, you got to have that self-care time.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I totally agree.
But so what really made you get to that point of like, I really need this self-care? And like, are you more conscious of it now?
Yeah, I mean, I'll be honest, I haven't really been like whatever, quote unquote, an activist for that long. Like I was going like 4.5 years ago, I was going to university. And I wanted to become I wanted to surf and make millions of dollars so that I could live in California. That was like my mindset. Like, I'll work for a surfing company, I'll make a lot of money, and I'll just be able to surf. And then ended up seeing a documentary, and it just kind of changed my whole life. But then I guess like I don't have like a whole bunch of years under my belt necessarily as an activist. So being conscious of those things hasn't really been a thing. Like I didn't really realize it, I guess. And it ended up being 3 years before I was like, holy shit, I haven't had a vacation. And I used to always go on vacations.
So which documentary was that? Is that what kind of brought you to like animal rights activism in general?
It actually wasn't animal rights. It was environmental rights. So it was a documentary called Spoil by a group called Pacific Wild.
Mm-hmm.
And at the time, I was going to university, and my brother, he was in high school, and he'd come up to just hang out for the weekend. And yeah, we came across this documentary, and it was about a company called Enbridge, which is a Calgary-based tar sands company, and they wanted to build a pipeline through the Great Bear from the Alberta tar sands to the Great Bear Rainforest to ship oil out to foreign markets. And they wanted to put the pipeline right through the rainforest. And I mean, I'll be honest, I grew up in North Vancouver, and I was fairly sheltered from all this sort of thing. So sheltered from, I grew up in a very privileged society. And so I didn't know about these kind of things. And to find out that there was a company that was actually going to build a pipeline through the largest intact temperate rainforest on the planet, like I couldn't even believe that was a thing. And I was just shocking. And so we watched this documentary, and afterwards it just made me completely rethink like what I was doing. And the entire time I was watching it, I was like, what? Like, how, like, this is happening? And I spent the next, I didn't actually drop out of university. Like, I didn't tell my parents that I dropped out, but I just stopped going to class. And I spent all day. I mean, actually, I did go to one class. I was going to environmental ethics. That was awesome. But I stopped going to all my econ classes, and I was just researching, and I started writing, and I hadn't done a lot of writing since high school. And I was just writing essays on these, and not for anybody, but just for myself, just to sort of learn more. And and then I came on to some information about Sea Shepherd, and that there were people actually going out and defending wildlife, putting themselves on the line. And I was like, I can't believe that. That's so cool. Like I always had the classic, like, I love dogs. We always had rescued dogs and rescued cats and rescued rabbits growing up, but I never really put that connection together. I mean, I wasn't vegan at the time. I actually wasn't even vegetarian at the time. But yeah, so that kind of just like, that documentary just sent me in a very, very different direction. So
you went pretty fast from just being, I want to surf every day, to activism 100% of your day.
Yeah. I mean, so that was I saw the documentary in December of 2011. And And in July of 2012, which, like 7 months later, I was on a ship in the Faroe Islands defending whales from the Grind. So yeah, very, very quick change. And I went vegetarian, kind of like my stepmom was vegetarian or is vegetarian. My mom was vegetarian. So I'd eaten a lot of vegetarian food growing up. And I thought, well, like after seeing the Spoiled documentary, I thought, well, maybe I'll try going vegetarian. And I didn't really know much about veganism. I mean, at all. I thought it was like a fringe thing and really weird, to be honest. And I knew that when I was going to the ship that it was vegan. So the day before I got to the ship, I just ate a whole bunch of eggs, a whole bunch of cheese, and was like, well, now I'm going to have to be vegan for, however long I'm on the ship for. And I got there and I fortunately the crew there was really supportive. And a lot of folks had been very involved with animal rights, and I learned so much. And then like the first week there, my mind was just blown, and I was like, I can't believe this happens. Like I felt so ignorant that I didn't know this before, that I hadn't even like attempted to try to look into, where my food was coming from or like the human rights abuses that were happening. And like a month and a half later, I had a really interesting meeting and just like interaction with hunt saboteurs in the UK, because we had to, after the campaign finished, we docked in London for 10 days and they came and volunteered for a little bit. And then we went to Southampton for a month and a half to overhaul our engines. So I got to sit down and learn about folks who were like, when you learn about Sea Shepherd, you think, oh, Sea Shepherd's like the ultimate, like these people are like the most amazing activists. But then you find out that they're these like anarchist vegan kids who are going out and chasing, all these rich assholes on horses who are hunting foxes with hounds. And I thought, like, this is so cool. Like, these are just like grassroots dudes going, and grassroots like women and a whole bunch of different folks just going out and like, going after these hunters. And I mean, they're getting punched and kicked and run over by these, like, run over by the horses, and still they're just out saving lives. And it was so cool. And one of the older hunt sabs handed me a copy of Animal Liberation. And that's kind of where my whole life changed, right then. And I read that book and was like, this is definitely on a different path than I was. So
for how dry that book is, it's really amazing.
Yeah, totally. I agree. And I actually read Free the Animals after by Ingrid Newkirk. And not that I agree with the majority of things that PETA does, but I think that book in itself, just to know, that's the first time I learned about what the Animal Liberation Front was through that book. And just like the fact that, again, that there were people willing to go out and risk their lives, risk their freedom to save animals. And that was really something that inspired me as well. So again, not that I'm a supporter of PETA, but the book itself I thought was incredible. So
it's funny that you mentioned Free the Animals. When I was in 9th grade, I did a book report on Free the Animals.
Right on. See, that's so awesome. Like I wish I had, like, on the ship, all these people were like, oh yeah, like I had this realization when I was 5 or this realization when I was 10. And I was like, wow, like when I was 10, all I cared about was Pokemon and like I did not care. I really, I admire you for that. That's really rad that people are that young and able to connect that. And then, like in high school, I cared about football, and that's it. So
to be fair, I also cared about Pokemon.
Cool,
I just didn't happen to eat meat.
Nice.
No, it's just one of those things. Like everyone's on their own path. Like it just
sure.
As long as we get there eventually. That's kind of how I view it.
Yeah, I agree too. And I think like when I first went vegan, I was like, oh, everybody should be vegan. And I felt like I was just like, I look back now, which is only like 4 years ago, and I was such an asshole because I'd only been vegan for like 5 months, and I'm demanding that everybody around me should be vegan. And it's just so silly. And I found that the more the longer I'm vegan, the more I'm around people who are vegetarian who then end up going vegan. People have to get there themselves. So this whole like pushing people, it just doesn't work,
Well, just be proud, because it only took you 4 years or so to get over that. It took me like 10.
Yeah, right on. Fair enough. Well, I've had some pretty. I've been fortunate enough to hang around some pretty cool folks who I think are just folks who have been around the animal rights movement for a long time. And sometimes I think that you get a lot of like younger activists like myself who surround themselves with other young activists and think that like the whole world should just be vegan and this and that. And fortunately, I was able to hang out with some sort of, like I said, veteran animal rights folks who are kind of like, hey, like this is probably not the best way to do things. So
yeah, I could only imagine like hooking up with the Sea Shepherds so early on as being an activist, just huge lessons like you can take from being around those type of activists.
Yeah, no, for sure. And just people who, again, who've been around for a long time. Like I learned about Shaq when I was on the ship, and I that was something that completely shocked me. And I had no idea that it even, that one, that Shaq had existed, but two, that they'd been oppressed the way they were, and that other activists within the movement have been oppressed. And I saw If a Tree Falls, and that was kind of all around the same time. So it's pretty overwhelming too, like to know that was happening. Like I remember walking, I got to the Faroe Islands. I got to the Shetland Islands in Scotland. That's where I met the ship. And about a week into being there, we were just getting ready to leave. And I was walking into town with my friend Josh, and he was telling me about like where he lived in San Francisco and who he lived with and his roommate, and how his roommate was on parole. And I, my first thought was like, holy shit, like your roommate's on parole. Like, what did he do? Like he must be like this is again, like my political stance and like my theoretical understanding of prisons was like, oh, like he must be doing something bad if he was in prison. Like, what did he do? Did he steal something? And my friend Josh said, no, he was a part of an organization called Stop Hunting and Animal Cruelty that took down this lab in the States and in the UK, and he got sentenced to jail for it. And I heard that and was like, what? Like you're kidding me right now. And so I went back, after we went to the bar, I went home and I spent like 4 hours. I was up till I think like 2 or 3 in the morning just researching about Shaq, and my mind was just blown. And that individual was Jake Conroy, and Jake's become a good friend of mine and also a mentor and somebody who I really look up to. Sort of like I was saying, one of the folks who's sort of taught me a lot about animal rights. And but yeah, so things like that were just very big in sort of changing my perspective on things, and obviously changing my perspective on prisons and that sort of thing. So.
What was like the most eye-opening part of going through that transition for you?
I think just that I felt like I'd been sheltered for so long about so many things. And I just, everything was just so overwhelming, I think. And just to learn that there were people who, you grow up and you think, okay, I need to graduate high school, go to university, get a job, have a family, live in a nice place. I live in North Vancouver, which I said it's a really, really nice place, with these big homes. And not that I don't live in a big home at all, and I work at a vegan cafe, but you're just surrounded by wealth and quote unquote prosperity. Mm-hmm. And when I realized that like that was all a lie, and that it was all just this fake thing, this thing that was just so empty and hollow, that was when I was just like, wow, like I need to be doing things differently. And the fact too that I have this like, I never for a second questioned my privilege growing up, not for a second, because I think that's what privilege does. It just shelters you from the reality of the world. And so when I sort of started learning about that, I was like, holy shit, like I need to not be doing things for myself. Like this is just ridiculous. Like how I've lived my entire life up until now doing things for myself, and it's time to really change things. And so I think that was kind of my eye-opening moment. So
that's interesting because like I didn't really have that moment about recognizing privilege and other things like that till well after becoming an animal rights activist. Mm-hmm. Because like that all came first for me. Like the social awareness of everything else came way later.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. I guess it's just, I don't know. I feel like, and I think like we talked about, we just said it, like everybody has their different experiences and different ways of getting to things. But I just started really questioning sort of my lifestyle and the people I was surrounding myself with as well. So, yeah.
You mentioned hooking up with hunt sabs, and man, I've always had the most mad fucking respect for hunt saboteurs. It's one of the few things that just, as far as being an activist, it still scares me a little bit because you're not just on that front lines, you're on the front lines with armed people.
Yeah, no, totally. And they're just like, they're consistently getting assaulted, mm-hmm. beaten up. And and you have the cops there just standing, watching it all happen. And the biggest issue with it is that the hunts are illegal. Like you can't legally hunt fox in the UK. Like it's illegal. But the hunters say, oh, well, we're just going out for a ride with our dogs. And the police just let it happen. And then they let all these people who are trying to stop it get beat up. It's so frustrating, but it's so badass. And they're like, the hunt saboteurs are just so incredible. We take a lot of inspiration from what the hunt saboteurs do. So
how did you get involved with your current project?
Yeah. So I'd been with Sea Shepherd for about a year at the time, and it was really amazing. I'd been on the ship for 9 months, the first time I went, and came back. I've always had a really tight knit family, and my younger brother has been one of my best friends. I also have, he's 21 or 20, no, he's 23 now. He just turned 23 yesterday. And then I have a 9-year-old brother. But again, my family's always been really close. And so I sort of noticed myself missing my family a little bit. And then when I came back, I realized that my brother, he didn't actually tell me, but while I was away, he went vegan as well. And he completely immersed himself in activism within Vancouver, and that included doing a lot of Indigenous solidarity work, in relation to pipelines and liquid natural gas pipelines being built. And so I realized that there were so many things that needed to be done in BC as well. And it's easy enough for me to, fly across the world, get onto a ship, go down to Antarctica, stop people from killing whales. But if there are things going on in your backyard, I think it's important to really focus on. And also, I don't have any specific skill set, or at least when I got to the ship, I didn't have any specific skill sets that made me, any better than another person who could come on and learn the same things I did. And I felt like if I could allow somebody else to have that experience and open up a spot on the ship, then I could come back and do a lot of things here. So I did that. And when I got here, I had a kind of an idea of trophy hunting that was going on within the province. I met somebody who was working for an eco-tour company at the time who said he'd seen trophy hunters all the time in the Great Bear Rainforest and that there wasn't a lot of attention being drawn on it. So I founded the organization Wildlife Defense League and slowly started learning about trophy hunting and overhunting in the province. And it was pretty quick. I came back from the ship in July, and then I launched the organization the next April, but I'd been working on it since September of that year. My partner, Emily, had helped a lot as well. And we just decided to launch our first campaign and work in solidarity with a group called the Klabana Keepers, who were already fighting overhunting in their territory. And it kind of just went from there. So it was pretty quick.
How has been the immediate response been from the community?
The community was really, really supportive of the work we did, or the work we were doing. The problem in British Columbia, we have a government that is hell-bent on destroying wildlife, hell-bent on destroying the environment for profit. So the most affected communities are Indigenous communities in the province in relation to that. Traditionally, people in the territory that we were blockading hunt moose and caribou, but they're just not able to anymore. I mean, there's been a 70% decline in moose in certain parts of the province. And that's because of overhunting, because of logging. And so when these families go out to traditionally harvest meat that they've been doing for, hundreds of years, they're not able to because, one, you have these hunters coming up from the city who have hundreds of thousands of dollars. They're driving, $150,000 lifted truck. They're bringing in $15,000 ATVs, big coolers, and they're poaching animals. See, there's no conservation officers in the territory, so there's just no law. And it's completely unregulated. So when we went out to block the road, the Indigenous folks in the area were really happy because it was the first time that they felt like they could just go and be in peace on the land, or one of the first times. They have hunting camps up in the territory, like I said, that we were blocking. And every year you have white hunters going up and raiding their camps, stealing their tents, stealing all their gear. The community was really, really supportive of the work we were doing.
That just, it blows my mind.
They're going and raiding these camps.
They're going and raiding their camps. Like, I get it. You're an ass and you're going to kill these animals, but on top of that, you're also it's so much.
Completely. And we dealt with, not obviously we didn't deal with racism, but we encountered so much racism. And it's really apparent that the resident hunting community in British Columbia, and when I say resident, I mean non-Indigenous residents of BC. So if you live in the province for more than 6 months of the year, then you can be classified as a resident and you can apply for a resident tag. The resident hunters are so racist. I mean, if you go onto the hunting forums and read about it, or if you go, any comments you find on our Facebook page that we try to get rid of as soon as possible, you just slowly, you're encountering racism at every bend. And anytime we had a hunter come up to the blockade, they had something racist to say about Indigenous people. They had horrendous things to say about the community. So it's very apparent that that hunting community, like I said, is very racist.
So is your main goal like to get governmental laws changed, or more to get societal change to not want to be accepting of this?
Yeah, well, so one thing we want trophy hunting across the province of British Columbia banned. I mean, we would like it banned in all of Canada, but we're trying to focus strategically on one province right now.
Mm-hmm.
So in regards to trophy hunting, yeah, we want it banned throughout the province. Overhunting is a bit of a different issue. See, our biggest issue with overhunting, I mean, one is that it's decimating wildlife, but the province isn't investing any money in doing wildlife counts at all. So you have the territory we blocked last year. There hasn't been a wildlife count since 2001, yet people on that territory, Indigenous folks on that territory, are reporting massive declines in moose and caribou. But there's no money to do a population count. So what we want the government to do is to do a population count to prove that the animals in that area are collapsed, and we want them to stop giving out tags. In other parts of the province, I mean, we have, right now, the government of British Columbia estimates that there are 8,500 wolves in the province. And the only way they actually get those numbers is by relying on hunters and ranchers who report how many they see and how many they kill. So, I mean, if we're seriously convinced that ranchers and hunters are going to be honest about the amount of wolves they see, it's insane. So different areas of the province, we try to focus on different strategic goals. But like I said, the goal in the area we're going right now, sorry, my dogs are just wrestling.
Oh, no worries.
That's fine.
Stop. Hey, stop. But yeah, the goal that in the territory we blocked last year, we want them to do a wildlife count again. And we want the government to spend more money on wildlife counts throughout the province to prove that, again, that wildlife are in decline. But in relation to governmental change, it's more about systematic change. So recognizing that we shouldn't be exploiting wildlife. And I don't think that's necessarily it's not going to come from the government that we have in power. And I'm just not convinced it's going to come from the system we have right now. So
how do you really distinguish the difference between overhunting and trophy hunting? Is it like just the size of like the antlers, or?
Yeah, well, it's a little bit challenging. So anytime a guide outfitter is going out, so within the province you have guides who have their business where they take hunters out, and they take resident hunters, but they also take non-resident hunters, so hunters from the States, from Europe, from other provinces in Canada, and they'll go out and hunt. You can almost guarantee that the guides are going to be trophy hunting. So whether it's moose, caribou, grizzly bears, black bears, wolves, you can guarantee that it's going to be trophy hunting. But when you have hunters coming up with specific tags, it's a little bit harder to distinguish. Because right now the law in British Columbia says that if you kill, the only animal you don't actually have to bring out of the forest if you kill is a grizzly bear. So you can shoot a grizzly bear, you can cut its head off, cut its paws off, take those out of the forest, but leave the rest of the body. But moose and caribou, mountain goats, black bears, you have to actually pull the meat out. So you can't leave it there. And that's where there's a gray area, because people say, oh, well, I'm hunting for meat. And it's like, well, like you just killed like the healthiest moose in that territory, like really you're hunting for meat, like you killed the biggest and healthiest moose. And so it gets a bit harder. And that's where we kind of have an argument kind of, comes out in a little bit of a debate. But the problem is that these hunters are going up into the territory that they've hardly spent time in. They'll come up once a year, and they act like they know it. They act like they've spent, time on that land, which they haven't. And so they're killing animals that they don't really understand are important parts of that population. And they're just shooting the nicest and, most beautiful animal they see. And when then you hear them say, well, I'm hunting for meat. And it's like, well, then why do you have the head cut off in the back? Why are you going to mount the head? Well, I'm going to mount the head. And it's like, that's a trophy. Like that's a trophy. Whether or not you eat that meat it's still a trophy. And like I said, that's kind of the same argument that, whether or not they're pulling the meat out or not, it's still a trophy. So
it reminds me the similarities of the argument Japan uses, but it's just the opposite. Like we're not here for the meat, but we'll use it. But
yeah, no, totally. And I think like, again, that's where we run into a bit of difficulty, but and that's why we want wildlife population counts to happen, because then it's easier to say like, listen, this area is being overhunted. I mean, so the territory we blocked, like I said, hasn't had a wildlife population study since 2001, but 7 hours south of that territory, moose are in decline by 70%. So you can guess that, the territory that we're up in is a major decline as well. But it's important to have those studies done. And unfortunately, I mean, I wish we had the money that we could help the community do the counts themselves, but those counts cost millions of dollars, and the government really needs to fund them. So there are different ways that we can, still use the government to our advantage. So
is the government kind of reluctant to act on these type of issues because of how much they rely on the economy of the natural resources in that area, either through logging or mining or other things, and maybe they view it like as a slippery slope. Like if we start caring about one, are they going to start really caring about the other issues?
Yeah, completely. That's like absolutely spot on. So what happened? So in relation to trophy hunting, in 2001, and not a lot of people know this, but in BC, the BC Wildlife Federation, which you would think, oh, sounds like a good organization, they're the lobby group for the trophy hunt and for hunting. Yeah. And then you have, right, the BC Wildlife Federation. And then you have the Guide Outfitters Association, which is, it's sort of like the union of guides. So everybody knows that they're pro trophy hunting, pro hunting. But people expect that the BC Wildlife Federation would be a little bit more on board with, because you'll see the BC Wildlife Federation coming out with posts where they say, oh, we helped bring in, somebody who was poaching fish or this or that. And it's like, I mean, yeah, you stop somebody from, somebody didn't have a fishing license and they fish 6 fish, and they use this as kind of like hey, look what we're doing. But really they are the lobby group for the trophy hunt. And in 2001, we had a different government in power, and environmental groups, indigenous groups had actually come to this government and said, listen, the trophy hunting of grizzly bears is unsustainable. We have a whole bunch of independent science to point towards the unsustainable hunt. We think that you should do a study to prove that these hunts are unsustainable, that the grizzly hunt is unsustainable. And the NDP was somewhat pro-environment, so they decided, okay, what we'll do, we'll hire bear biologists from across the country, so across Canada. We'll bring them to BC, and these are the top bear biologists in the country. We'll bring them to BC. We'll have them do a study, and we'll see where population numbers are at, so we can see if if the trophy hunt is quote unquote sustainable or unsustainable. The bear biologists came back with scathing reports saying essentially that the number of licenses being given out were completely unsustainable. That grizzly hunting should stop across the board in British Columbia, and so they banned the trophy hunt. And sure enough, the BC Wildlife Federation, the Guide Outfitters Association were just they were livid that this had happened. 3 months later, an election was called and a new government was elected. And one of the big reasons that this new government was elected was because the BC Wildlife Federation and the Guide Outfitters Association went to this Liberal government and said, listen, if you legalize the trophy hunt, when you get into power, we'll have all of our members vote for you. And they have enough members that it can swing the vote. And the first thing the Liberal government did when they got into power, they fired the entire bear biologist panel, hired biologists from the States and from Europe who had actually never studied bears in Canada before. The biologists came back and said, yep, hunt's fine. Liberal government legalized the trophy hunt, and it's been legal since then. So completely ridiculous. And then in relation to overhunting, essentially, I mean, the greatest threat to wildlife in British Columbia is logging, mining, oil and gas, without a doubt. And we know that the Liberal government goes hand in hand with these industries. Petronas, which is a Malaysian LNG company, actually just offered an Indigenous nation $1.5 billion to allow pipeline to come through their nation. The government was part of this deal as well. And the nation said no. They said, absolutely not. We're not going to take your money. So what the Liberal government did is just said, well, we understand that your nation voted. We appreciate the time that you took to do research into this project, but we're actually still going to go through with it. So your vote doesn't matter. And so projects like this and an attitude like this is the reason that wildlife are being destroyed. So, I mean, the Liberal government, there's not a chance that the Liberal government will protect wildlife without immense public pressure. So,
I don't get why they allow the grizzlies to just be left there, but all the other animals, they don't.
Well, yeah, right. Exactly. The problem is now that, so what had happened with one of the Green Party members in British Columbia had the idea that he would suggest a bill or introduce a bill that would force trophy hunters to bring grizzly meat out of the forest, and he thought that would be more difficult for them to do, so they would have trouble, hunting bears, because it's like, oh well, now we have to bring the meat out of the forest. But it kind of backfired, because what actually ended up happening is that you had all these guide outfitters who were starting to try to justify it as a meat hunt and not a trophy hunt. And that's the same thing. That's the problem that we have with, the hunting of moose, the hunting of caribou, mountain goat, that sort of thing as well, is that they are animals that people do eat. So they just say, oh, well, it's a meat hunt. And then everybody's okay with it, right? And again, too, the general attitude within the province, I mean, almost 90% of the province disagrees with trophy hunting. But when you bring up, well, like, how do you feel about hunting? Well, if they're hunting for meat, I feel okay about it, right? And so the Wildlife Federation and the Guide Outfitters Association use that. And so they're able to justify, trophy hunting.
That seems like a really hard battle to win with individual people, because like it's easy to sit down and talk to people about like fur, and it's easy for them to say, well, yeah, that's not right, and blah blah blah, right? And they're fine with that. But with the hunting, it's just like what you're saying. They don't like hunting, but if you're eating it, they kind of justify it because they themselves eat animals too, so they can't really say it's wrong because then they're saying they're wrong at the same time.
Yeah, no, totally. I mean, and the challenging part, like I said, is just that. And so having wildlife counts is so important because of that, because then we can prove that these hunts are unsustainable, right? Mm-hmm. So even if you're going to hunt the animal for meat, even if these resident hunters are going to hunt for meat, then, you shouldn't be hunting this area because it is unsustainable. And I think it's super important to talk about the fact that these nations who were indigenous nations who were pushed onto these small reserves were promised that they would always have access to their hunting territory, their traditional hunting territory. They were promised that. And that's just not happening. And the government's just absolutely not upholding that. I mean, there are some nations that actually haven't hunted caribou since the 70s because they've realized that these animals are in decline. Yet we're still giving licenses out to resident hunters to come and hunt caribou, right? So it's this consistent, like, colonial, racist, essentially like genocide that's continually happening to indigenous people, and it's not being talked about. So that's something that we really try to introduce back into the conversation as well, because it's easy to say, stop the trophy hunt or stop overhunting, but we need to also understand that this is affecting these communities so much. And so again, that's part of our organization's mandate, is to work in solidarity with indigenous people who are already fighting trophy hunting and overhunting on their territory. So.
With the SIL hunts, I know that they work really hard on trying to turn the indigenous people against the activists. Do you find them trying to do the same thing to you guys? Sorry,
what hunt is that?
Like the SIL hunts that happen. I know they try to turn, say that they're trying to stop indigenous people from doing their traditional hunts when they're
yeah. So that really hasn't worked, that argument with us or against us, mm-hmm. because in every press release and in everything we talk about, we always mention that we have no intention of blocking indigenous hunters. We support indigenous people's right to hunt. So it's, that argument it's just not possible for people to argue like that. And again, because part of our mandate states that we work in solidarity with indigenous people, it's very challenging for them to have that. And I think the biggest mistake that a lot of these big enviro groups have, like especially with the seal hunt, is that they never really, not to say that everyone didn't, but a lot of these groups didn't stand in solidarity with indigenous people who were mm-hmm. hunting traditionally. And because of that argument was able to be used against them to say, oh, well, and instead of it just right off the bat being like, hey, listen, we support these hunts. We're not against these hunts. We're against the commercial type of hunting. So.
Do you ever, being vegan and animal rights activist, do you ever find that being a hypocrisy in yourself that is a little bit of a struggle?
I think that, I find that being an activist in itself is you're going to run up against different types of hypocrisy where you think like, wow, like, am I being hypocritical of myself? Am I, not doing enough to help the animals? Like where do I fall in line with, the way I feel about certain types of hunting or fishing and that sort of thing. And I think, again, that comes back to, as we talked about earlier before, is this sort of privilege and this sort of white saviorism where we think, oh, well, we can just end hunting and nobody should hunt and we should, move into like the 21st century and, all animals should be safe. But really, like, that's a very privileged way of thinking. And that's just erasing a history that was, that happened a long time before we came here. And something that really resonated with me, I was at Resistance Ecology this year, and we were able to speak about the work we were doing, but we were also able to listen to a few different Indigenous people talking. And Amanda Lickers said something, like I said, that really resonated with me. And that was that, factory farming was never part of an indigenous way of life. And factory farming never existed before colonization. So, and again, industrial scale farming. So when you have, people complaining about factory farming and this and that, like the most important thing we need to be thinking about is that this is not an indigenous problem. Factory farming was never an indigenous problem. And in fact, like she was saying, factory farming affects their territory, it affects their hunting territory, the territory that they use to grow food, but it's our problem to fix. It's a settler's problem to fix. And so we need to really focus on the fact that, like, yeah, that's the truth. I mean, it's not up to us to push our values on indigenous people, who are, again, fighting that same fight. Sorry. Shush. And also too, I think that, like, as vegans, we need to think about the fact that, having the fact that the indigenous group that we work with, the Klabana Keepers, they kicked out Royal Dutch Shell. I mean, they've kicked out billion-dollar corporations, multi-million-dollar corporations from the territory, from drilling and from, other resource like exploitation. And that saves so many animals. It saves so many animals. And if we really do want a bright and what I would consider a beautiful future for animals, then we need to start coalition building. And so you're going to come across things where you're like, oh, wow, I feel a bit hypocritical. But I mean, we need to start building alliances with other groups to really stop the true issues that are happening. I mean, and that true issue is the problem of capitalism and what capitalism does to animals, to people, and the environment. So
I was going to ask about if anyone had that backlash on that, like, from animal rights, if you've ever had backlash from animal rights people, but I mean, pretty much answered the same way.
Yeah.
It's a privilege thing for sure.
Mm-hmm. For sure. And we've had like a little bit of backlash, and we've just sort of had to, my brother wrote an article that's entitled Indigenous Solidarity for Vegans. And it just talks a little bit about, like, what we should be doing as activists and as allies, and how important it is to really just not necessarily push our beliefs aside, but just to understand that there is a history of genocide, with residential schools and extermination of animals that indigenous people were hunting, and a way of life that was completely destroyed. And we need to acknowledge that as well. So
the only, like, kind of group that I would see having, like, such a huge problem with those type of things is, and maybe we talk about it probably way too much on the show, is the whole Francione group.
Yeah, so I'm not super familiar with Gary Francione. I try to just avoid anything that he has to do.
That's pretty good.
But you're right, and it's just that abolitionist thing where, I mean, again, you have people who are like, yeah, it just, the idea that, like, that we should just completely stop eating animals. I think Cecil was a perfect example of that. Mm-hmm. Or Cecil the lion. We had so much attention being drawn to trophy hunting at the time, and then all of a sudden you had these animal rights activists just completely co-opting that by saying, I am Cecil too, and a chicken Cecil too, and this and that. And I mean, I understand that argument, and I had to have this argument with people all the time. Like, listen, I get where you're coming from, but we have people who are against trophy hunting right now. We have an opportunity to draw attention to the fact that, hey, yeah, Cecil the lion's happening in Africa, but in British Columbia and across Canada and the States, grizzly bears, wolves, black bears, moose, caribou, they're all being hunted for trophy, and, like, animal rights activists just hopped on and were, like, posting photos. Like, I saw I am Cecil too, and it was a lobster photo. And it's like, I mean, I get the connection, but, like, that is not bringing people in,
Yeah.
And that whole abolitionist approach is just not gonna, I mean, it hasn't worked. It clearly hasn't worked. So
I think it's funny because, I completely understand it. Like, don't get me wrong. Yeah. But there's no, like, connection between strategy and tactics behind it.
None. Completely. And I think that, like, I don't mean to say, like, we is, like, what we need to do, and I know a lot of people know this, but we need to start being strategic, and we need to start having, like, setting goals and working towards those goals. I mean, yeah, the idea that, like, ending animal exploitation, it's great, and that's, I'm fully supportive of it, but we need to start focusing our attention more strategically, for sure.
It's like you're not going to get there in one step.
Totally, definitely.
Yeah. So talking about that, what are some the things that you wish were happening more as far as the activist community that maybe isn't as happening as much as you'd like?
I wish people were building coalitions and working to build coalitions. I mean, I think there are groups that are doing that, but I wish animal rights activists were more willing to work with human rights groups and environmental rights groups, and just again building those. Like, I mean, we're fighting capitalism. That's our biggest issue, and capitalism is destroying the planet. Like I said, destroying humans and destroying animals, and we need to fight against that. And the only way to really do that is to branch out, and align yourselves with groups that maybe aren't vegan or may not have the same beliefs, but you can talk to about it. And yeah, again, build coalitions, because that's what we need. We need a mass movement to stop the destruction of the planet.
I love that you brought up the fact that like what we're doing is fighting capitalism, because I mean, I still run into so many activists that don't see that intersectionality and like really the cause, like that's the root cause of so many other horrendous things.
Yeah, totally. And like, yeah, I mean, even like you have groups, like large groups working with restaurants like Subway and, investing millions of dollars into adding a vegan option to Subway, as if that's a solution to ending animal exploitation. And you're not thinking about the fact that like, oh God, I mean, I could list the things. I mean, Subway is a horrendous company to work for. They don't pay people fairly whatsoever. I mean, they offer poor, like it's just, there's so many things wrong with that. Like so many things wrong with advertising for Subway. And they're the largest fast food chain on the planet. They're bigger than McDonald's. Right? So, I mean, more animals are dying because of Subway than because of McDonald's. Yet we're willing to work with them to add a vegan option, like a vegan patty. Like where, it's just, yeah, those are the things that just drive me nuts. And I think that not having, I mean, if you are an animal rights activist, an environmental rights activist, we need to have an anti-capitalist analysis, without a doubt. I mean, you cannot be a capitalist, and I mean, it's not possible.
I'm 100% for making veganism trying to be as easy as a lifestyle as possible, but I kind of look at, and maybe this is just me being an old cranky ass, but when I went vegan, there wasn't those options, and it didn't fucking stop me. So yeah, if I don't really, I think it's great that there's options, but I don't see the lack of an option at Subway stopping somebody from being vegan.
I totally agree, and I'm also like with that. I mean, with Subway too. I'm not convinced that a person is going to go into Subway who is thinking, I think I'm going to have the turkey bacon club today. I'm not convinced that they're going to go in and eat a vegan patty. I'm convinced that people who are vegan are going to go there and have something to eat. But I really don't think it's. I mean, it's a marketing play. They're a multi-million-dollar company. They're not interested in veganism or helping animals. Like it's So it's just a ploy, and I think that if like that's again strategy and tactics. I don't think that's strategic. I don't think that's. I mean, yeah.
And this is it comes into the aspect of I don't know maybe how you feel about this one, but I've talked about it on the show before where I love the grassroots activism that like Direct Action Everywhere is doing, but I can't get totally behind the campaigns of like going into like Chipotle's and Whole Foods because I don't see the long-term strategy behind those.
Yeah, and I mean, again, I think that there is a lot of really incredible grassroots work going on within the animal rights community, environmental rights community, the human rights community. But again, yeah, we have to be strategic and we have to set goals because I think we have each of us has a very small period of time on the planet to do something that can have significant change. And if we need to just, set goals and achieve those and have goals that are achievable as well and that are able to pull people in. Like people need to be able to relate to the work you're doing. Right? I mean, and again, I know I don't mean to sound corny, but and you hear all the time, but we need to create a mass movement. I mean, that's just like plain and simple. And sometimes I think that we're not really conscious of the fact that people aren't even close to where we are in our beliefs yet. So we need to figure out how we can pull those people in. And sometimes I think that groups aren't conscious of that. So, so right now, I would say from my perspective, the best thing doing that right now would be resistance ecology, which I'm super bummed we missed this year. Do you know of any other like real building that's happening besides that? Yeah, I mean, I totally agree. I think that the folks who put on resistance are incredible. And I mean, the work they're doing separate from that with the No New Animal Lab campaign and other projects are just, I mean, incredible. And I think this year's conference was sort of one of the better weekends I've ever had before and just so eye-opening in so many ways. I'm not aware of any other grassroots animal rights organizations or sort of conferences or anything that are really trying to do that. I know with our group personally is that's exactly what we're trying to do. We don't really organize. I mean, Wildlife Defense League doesn't really organize within the animal rights community. We organize outside of it. And the reason is that while we don't necessarily come across like an animal rights organization, the majority of people who organize with us are vegan. All our campaigns are vegan. So we provide vegan food the entire time. And we're just sort of trying to teach people about that and bring people in while working outside of that community. So, but I'm not aware of any other organizations that are doing that. And my hope is that resistance ecology can become like the National Animal Rights Conference, not in any sort of the way politically it is set out to be, but just that it can become as big as that. So you can have 1,000 people, 1,000, like I think there was like 12 or 1,600 people at the National Animal Rights Conference this year. Like, I just can't imagine if that was like, if resistance ecology was like that, and that they had the financial support that the National Animal Rights Conference does, because it would just be, it's so politically forward. Resistance ecology, that is, not the National Animal Rights Conference.
Yeah, we were unable to attend because of work schedules this year, but we've made it a pact that we're definitely going next year.
Yeah, right on. Yeah, I mean, it's amazing. Yeah. So
you have an Indiegogo campaign going on?
Yeah, so we have an Indiegogo campaign going on to fund our fall campaign. I mean, our yearly budget is very, very small. We are completely volunteer run, so we rely on campaigns like this to fund the work we do. It's titled "Help Us Stop the Exploitation of Wildlife," and essentially, it's going to fund our fall campaign. We're trying to raise $10,000. Currently, we've raised $5,300, and we have 11 days left to raise the rest. So, I mean, if listeners can support or even just share, you can go on our Facebook page, you can find the link and just share it as much as possible. Because again, like I said, it's not cheap to get up to where we go. Fuel, insurance for vehicles, food, all that ends up costing quite a bit of money. So, support is incredible. I mean, even though we would love to raise $10,000. That's our goal again. And it's really the only way that, it doesn't directly affect the pockets of us if we have to end up, fronting money for it. But, we've already raised $5,000, and that's so cool. Like, I'm so happy with that. I mean, it's really neat to see people willing to support us, willing to donate $100 or $20 or even $5. We've got a lot of $5 to $10 donations, and we're really grateful for that.
So besides is most of it to just fund like the fuel and everything else of getting up there, or what else is all that $10,000 for? Yeah, I mean, well, we just bought a generator, and that was $1,300, and that generator allows us to charge all of our equipment, so all of our electronics, cameras, radios, that sort of thing. So that's a huge expense. Insuring our vehicle is always, another big expense. We actually have to insure 2 vehicles this time, and we end up having to do lots of repairs to the vehicles before they go because, we don't drive the vehicles during the year, so they end up having to get fixed up. And then fuel. I mean, we drive, sometimes 22 hours to get to the destinations where we're going. Oh, so wow. Fuel is just so expensive. And it's actually, fuel in Canada it's an extra, it's almost, it's not double, but I mean, it's a lot more expensive in Canada than it is in the States. So we end up spending, again, tons of money on that. So it's not super cheap. 22 hours driving?
Mm-hmm.
That just is insane.
Is that mainly just backwoods driving, or is that?
It gets a bit more backwoods the further you get up north, but for the most part, it's on a highway. But yeah, it's incredible how far it is. I mean, you do the drive over 2 or 3 days. Like, it's just wow, it's incredible.
But it must. I mean, on the flip side, it must be stunningly beautiful.
Yeah, it's incredible, and that's kind of like when we were saying, well, like I haven't taken a vacation in 3 years, and I had one just this summer. I still when we get to go up to these places, it's incredible. I mean, the territory is so beautiful. I mean, last year we saw grizzly bears, caribou, moose. So many animals, and so that's definitely a benefit of going up, and you really realize how beautiful the province is, and it really just resonates with you about how we really need to be doing a lot more to protect the places that we live in. So
I ran into a moose once, scared the shit out of me.
You know what, they can be really, really aggressive. It was funny when you think there's you see grizzly bears and you're all worried. But when we were up in the Sacred Headwaters, a lot of the Indigenous folks were saying, grizzly bears are scary, but you do not run into a bull moose during a rut. That is the worst type of animal you could run into. And you think it's just a big deer, but no, definitely not.
Yeah, they're giant. I've never seen one myself. I've only seen them on video and stuff, but they can be giant.
Oh, they're huge. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I mean, you can, like, if you, especially, and you got to be so careful when you're up there. I mean, if you hit, like, if you're driving on the highway and you hit a moose, I mean, it can actually kill you.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, they're huge animals.
I watched that Mythbusters.
Oh yeah. Right on.
So have you ever ran into like one of those situations up there, like a scary situation, either with wildlife or just the aspects of being in nature?
Well, we haven't had too many situations like that. I mean, the most threatening situation for us is the hunters. We haven't had a lot of time where we've, run into bears, or different wildlife where we haven't been in a vehicle or haven't been able to access the vehicle quickly. So that's never really an issue. It's mainly, it's the hunters that we always have to worry about. So
what kind of aggression do they show?
Different levels. So, I mean, you'll have a lot of almost always verbal aggression.
Mm-hmm.
Verbal aggression, whether we encounter them or whether it's on our Facebook page. And then some physical as well. Last year we had a father and a son come up who were very inclined to get through the blockade, but they knew they weren't going to get through. And they were pushing us and shoving us and threatening us. And we had another father and son pair that rolled up, and they had their guns in their consoles, and they were kind of holding their guns and keeping their hand on them and just telling us that, there was no way that they were going to, we were going to stop them from coming through and this and that. And then we had a hunter who actually tried to drive over us in his truck, and we had to stand in front of him. Ended up having actually to sit down in front of the truck so he wouldn't run us over, because he just kept driving when we were standing there and kept driving right into our chests. So yeah, very different levels, but you never really know what you're going to expect. And that's sort of the more intimidating thing, is that you see a truck drive up and you think this could be a really positive conversation where the truck just turns around, or it could turn really, really bad really quickly. So you never really know, and you always have to be prepared for whatever's to come. So
is the blockade just your vehicles, or like what is actually the blockade like?
Yeah, it was just our vehicles last year.
Mm-hmm.
So we had two different vehicles that we were able to just put across the road. The road's it's like a little bit less than like a two lane road. So you're able to just put the vehicles through, and the only way the hunters would be able to get through is to smash through. They threaten to do it every year, but I'm just not convinced that they're going to, because we have cameras on them at all times. And they know that anytime they do something, it's going right up on the internet. So I'm not convinced that they're going to do that. So yeah, it's just really easy. You just, block the roads, and anytime the hunters come up, you just, have a conversation, and kind of goes from there.
Is there any resistance from like local law enforcement or anything on these blockades?
Last year we had the conservation officer who he came up the first day and just sort of wanted to hear about what we were doing. They do more of, the law that they uphold is more under the Wildlife Act. So it's not as much of an arrestable offenses as it is like ticketing offenses. So civil offenses like overhunting or, that sort of thing, or, they can write tickets for interfering with hunts. So he came up, he was really friendly. He just said, like, oh, I understand what's happening, and took off. And it wasn't until the last day of the blockade that the police showed up. And it was kind of funny because, I mean, we were aware, they knew how long we were going to be there for. We know that they're very quote unquote intuitive, but they came the last day and said, how long you be here for? And I just kind of laughed it off. I was like, well, how long we're going to be here for. Like, it's like, don't act like you don't know. Like, you showed up the last day of the blockade. Come on. And they wanted to come into camp, and they said, the first officer said, oh, like, I'm just going to, I just want to come in and just take a few photos. And I just said, of course not. Like, you're not absolutely taking a single photo of anybody here. And we kind of had a line in the sand. We had a pink spray paint can that we drew a line that the police weren't allowed to cross ever. We just kept them at that line and said, you're not allowed to come across here. And I mean, they were, again, they, as police do, they use manipulative language to try to, to try to get you to tell them what you're up to and that sort of thing. And we're just very cautious about that. And so that was sort of the only resistance we had from police there. But the police that was the resistance that we dealt with. So it wasn't very much. But prior to us setting up the blockade, they'd actually sent in a sniper team to remove the Klabon keepers who were occupying a drill on their territory. The drill was from a company called Black Steel. fire steel, and they were drilling without permission. So the Club Keepers went up, peacefully occupied it, just sat there, and the RCMP came in and removed them with sniper rifles. So, it's evident that as white people, we deal with police oppression in a very different way. I mean, we hardly feel it, but Indigenous people are, being taken down from these drills with sniper rifles, and the police just came up and approached us very peacefully. So it's sort of evident what their goals are.
Wow. It kind of blows my mind that you're able to just draw a line literally with pink paint and say, we're not going to allow police to cross this, because being in different forest actions and tree sits, that would never fly in the States.
Yeah. And this situation is very different in BC, in that the territory we're in is unceded, which means that it was never actually signed over by Indigenous people to the government. So legally, Indigenous people still own that land. It's still their land, technically. I mean, and granted, across the states and in Canada, there have been treaties signed, but those treaties were signed, under duress. They were signed illegally, or forced to be signed illegally. But in BC, it's a very unique situation where there are actually Indigenous nations that are taking land back from the government and saying, listen, this is our land. We never signed it over. I mean, the Chilcotin case is a very, very prominent case that happened last year, where the Chilcotin First Nations were actually given back vast territory that they actually technically own. So there's a bit of a gray area as to what the police can and can't do. And it depends on, I mean, they're very pro-industry. So if there's an industry blockade, there's a lot more pressure than there is if there's a hunting blockade. So,
okay.
Yeah. But again, like the police, like legally, they actually don't have a right to arrest anybody on that territory because it is unceded and it's not their territory. So they're not even a legitimate force. So
they're just like a normal civilian at that point.
Yeah. I mean, but then again, there's the argument that, well, it's Crown land, so it's a gray area. So they're a little bit more cautious. But in saying that, currently, I don't know if listeners, or if y'all are familiar with the Unistoten camp, but that's an Indigenous camp that is blockading 3 different pipelines coming from the Alberta tar sands. And they're occupying their land peacefully. It's unceded land of the Unistoten people. So they built a healing center and they've built a camp where people can come up and stay. They have permaculture gardens, and it's very, very incredible. And what they're doing is they're occupying their traditional territory as it's their right to do. And there's a belief right now that the RCMP are gathering in 2 different towns in British Columbia to actually raid the camp. So again, the land is unceded. It's not the RCMP's territory. It's not the Crown's territory. It's the Unistoten people's territory, but the RCMP are ready to act. So there is a gray area there. And again, when industry are involved and when millions of dollars are involved, it tends to be a little bit different. So, and again, just so that people know, you can go on to the Unistoten website. They're calling for support. Groups can sign on to a letter that supports the Unistoten. Over 400 groups have already signed on to it. So again, just to encourage people to support them and help them in their fight. So,
well, how can people, get involved with what you guys are doing, help donate to the campaign, and maybe actually, become an activist for you guys?
Yeah, for sure. Well, we right now, the Indiegogo campaign is the most important thing. We're trying to, like I said, raise the last bit of money, the last sort of half of the $10,000. So if people want to support our work, the best thing that they can do is share the campaign, donate if possible. In the future, we will be accepting crew applications, but right now we have our crew filled for this campaign. But if people are in Vancouver and they want to help out, we have a few things coming up in the winter as well that we haven't quite announced just yet, but we're going to need volunteers for. So if people can send emails and, whatever capacity they can to help is awesome. So,
well, awesome. Well, we end every episode saying "fuck, shit, damn." Would you mind saying it for us this week?
All right. Yeah, fuck, shit, damn.
Yeah, awesome.
Great.
Thank you so
much. Right on.
This week you heard
Apache by Visioneers.
Right now you're listening to
Walk on the Wild Side by DJ Disse.
I would normally do a shout out to people who left us iTunes reviews over the week, but unfortunately we didn't have one. If you haven't done an iTunes review and you've listened in the last week, why not? Give us a little love. Just throw it back a little bit. Go click some stars and say, hey, I thoroughly enjoyed it. I'm assuming you enjoyed it if you listened to it this far.
And you're still listening.
So, help us out a little bit. It's free for you, and it really helps the show. So please, go do an iTunes review for us.
Fuck, shit, damn.
You didn't do the social media stuff.
That's right. Fuck, shit, damn. If you haven't liked us or followed us or become our friend on any of our social media, you're rude, because we're really nice. We often talk about things on there that we don't talk about on the show, and by often, pretty much every day, because that's what people do these days. So be our friend. Like us, follow us, obey, conform, consume. WhичSidePodcast.com. Click on the social tab. I don't know. That works. Fuck, shit, damn.
Fuck shit, damn.
I always think it's funny. Like us, follow us.
Which Side Podcast is hosted and produced by Jordan Halliday and Jeremy Parkin of the Which Side Media Collective, with web design by Jordan Halliday and sound design by Jeremy Parkin. Booking by Mari Halliday. Theme music by Commandantes. Go to whichsidecollective.org to check out the other shows in the collective. As always, fuck shit damn.